Teachers of Reddit, what the worst thing that happened on a school trip? I'm a student, but at our school trip 2 teachers had an affair. People found out 2 years later and they're still going strong, lol. Another teacher mysteriously birthed a child 9 months after another school trip with my sister's class. The father was another teacher that was on the trip as well. I live in a small town, and rumors travel fast. Father was another teacher. Oh boy, for a second I thought that was about to end up a lot sketchier than it did. Once my boss fricked up and we got to the airport late and we missed our flight. So 40 kids and 7 adults, and he refused to split our group up. We ended up having to stay an extra night. It was a nightmare since our bags made it and we didn't. Also had a student fall off the train platform and onto the tracks, breaking ribs and knocking herself out cold. She looked like a ragdoll going down and I felt helpless just trying to keep the other kids calm. She was okay eventually. Not a teacher, but once went on a trip to the woods. One kid climbed up onto the trees. After 10 minutes of sitting in the tree he decided to go down, and one branch snapped and the kid fell. There was a small twig just sticking out of this kid's thigh. Rushed to the hospital later and is doing fine now. As a first grade student, the worst thing that happened to me was being sent home with Pinky just before my class and I were leaving for our field trip to the Bluebell factory. All I can remember was crying on my mom's lap all day because it was so unfair. Not a teacher, but a ski instructor. Many of my younger students will come from public schools on field trips. My boss always says get them away from the bunny hill, the easiest hill, to go on the chairlift, so the parents teachers don't see them fall. My worst story was when I had a group on the younger side, 6 to 10. The youngest girl had a panic attack on the chairlift. Luckily I was able to get her to calm down till the top of the hill. By the time we finally got to the top of the chairlift she had already wet herself. So I had to get her and the rest of the group down to chalet and find my boss with an army of children. I could not tell them to resin we were going back because it could hurt her feelings. Mind you, she was crying the whole time. It took 30 minutes to get down the hill since none of the kids had skied before and my junior ski instructor did jack shit. I would have sent him down the hill with her, but he did not listen to a word I told him and I didn't want a missing child case. Full stop. All the other kids were complaining that they have to go back and stop skiing. And trust me, there is nothing more fun than explaining to your boss that there was an issue like that. Not a teacher, but I was a student. We went out ice skating. A 190-pound guy I sorta knew. He was in one of my classes. Didn't like him, but I was too nice to tell him off. Was having trouble staying up and I was the closest person to him, so he grabbed me and used me for stability. Only problem was he was putting all his weight on me and ended up pushing me down. Then because I was what was keeping him up, he fell and in the process stepped on top of my fingers and sliced 4 of them open. I really despise that guy. I'm okay, but I still have the scars and a story to tell. Was on a week-long camp. About 80% of the students got really sick. Throwing up, fevers, diarrhea, the works. I remember trying to sleep and every 30 minutes or so a new student would knock on my cabin door asking for more medication or another sick bag. These were 7th grade students and this was the longest they had been away from home. We went to Parliament House and literally had students sleeping and throwing up in little back rooms whilst a few healthy, not as sick students completed the tour. A similar thing happened to the year level below me when I was at school. Everyone had to go home. It was extra sad because that was one of the best camps. When I was in the 2nd grade we took a field trip to the forest preserve. For me it was an awesome field trip. Being led by a guide through this cool hiking trail and learning things about nature was my kind of thing. About halfway through the hike a few of us decide to take the fun way across a thick log over a little creek. This kid named Marcello was in front of me and he was goofing off a bit too much and slipped. He fell into the creek, but in the process smacked his face into the log. We helped get him out of the water and noticed that his mouth was bleeding profusely. When he smacked his face on that log he got a stick about 2 inches long jammed up into his gums. It was pretty dang gnarly and the park ranger that was leading the hike called for an ambulance. I work with 18-21-year-old students with disabilities. We took the students on our annual canoe trip at the end of the year. It's typically like a 2-hour canoe ride through a chain of lakes and this particular year didn't go so well. One of the students was aggressively yelling at other students to paddle harder. Another student got annoyed and turned around and started beating this student with his paddle. We had to get all the canoes. There were probably 7 of them to shore to get these 2 students out because they were bludgeoning one another. Well, camp counselor story kind of adjacent in that parents put all their trust in camps and their employees to care for their kids. Anyway, camp contracted with outside rafting company for teen campers to do a rafting trip. One of their 20-something guides thought it would be awesome to sleep with a 14-year-old girl on said trip. I just remember the dark winds of shame that descended over the whole camp after they all got back. Police interviews. The girl's solemn parents walking through to get to the offices. The camp director, who was not on the trip but was having to step down and leave at night after campers had gone to sleep. Not a teacher, but when I was in high school a guy who was a grade above me went swimming in a lake during a school trip and was pulled underwater by an undercurrent. They didn't find his body until the next day. Our bus driver stopped on train tracks as a train was coming. Our bus full of first graders was approaching train tracks as the lights flashed and the gate started to lower. Our driver decided not to stop at the tracks, like any bus should by law, and thought maybe she could beat the lowering arms. She realized she couldn't and braked on the track. The first of 2. The gate arms slammed onto our bus, and a man stopped at a red light got out of his car to lift it off my side of the bus. I panicked from the front seat as the incoming train whistled, and the parent chaperones and I screamed at her to move back. She kept saying I can't go in reverse. She had no panic in her voice at all. Thankfully the train came on the second track. I can't remember if she actually backed up or not. I was absolutely traumatized and spent the beginning of the trip on the phone with transportation. They sent us another driver for the way home, and our original driver sat awkwardly in the front seat. We take the same trip every year, and every year I cringe when we cross the tracks. Oh god, I'd say that gave you nightmares. It was my own Europe trip in high school. London, Paris, Brussels, Amsterdam. 1. First night in London, witnessing someone get their face slashed open by a broken bottle in a fight in Trafalgar Square. 2. Second day in London, encountering a dead body homeless person in Piccadilly Circus. 3. First night in Paris. Our hostel was rather close to the red light district and as we walked past a strip club the bouncer outside grabbed a friend's arm and tried to yank her inside. 4. Second day in Paris. Some kids were begging in front of the Paris Opera House and when one guy wouldn't give a kid money, the kid punched the guy in the face and broke his nose. 5. Some of the kids went into a coffee shop in Amsterdam because we were allowed to wander by ourselves in each city, and when we landed in Atlanta the drug dogs alerted because the kids had traces of pot on the soles of their shoes. 6. In the Atlanta airport waiting for our flight to our home city, the lead teacher fell and broke her arm and busted up her face pretty badly, so when we got off the plane in our hometown, the parents were horrified to see our teacher being pushed down the concourse in a wheelchair, looking quite worse for wear. This needs to be a movie. Not a teacher, but years ago, the grade above me was touring Texas for a field trip, about a week long, and they all rode in one van. Anyways, their bus was robbed while they were touring the Alamo. Now again, this was like a week-long trip around Texas. Since they had no extra clothes and like 4 or 5 days left on their trip, they had to all go buy clothes and other necessities from Walmart. Then the next year the bus they were on caught on fire. Guess they really had bad luck with field trips. They just graduated high school today. Had a kid drop acid on a trip to Disneyland. He assaulted a cast member. Then he tried to fight the cop that responded while screaming he was Jesus. I'm not a teacher but I'm currently a student in Australia. My high school is a very well-off private high school, and so in year 10, sophomore year, the school sends the entire year on various overseas tours to different countries in Southeast Asia and Central Australia. I went to Thailand but one of my friends went to Cambodia. When they were leaving to go to the airport to head home, he went to the toilet before leaving the hotel. Anyway, the teachers and all the students forgot about him and left before he came back. He was gone for like 3 minutes. So they all left for the airport and now my friend is stuck in a hotel. in country where he does not speak the language. Well, instead of panic he manages to get himself a tuk-tuk. I think that's how you spell it, and manages to find his own way to the airport. In the meantime the teachers and all the students only realize he is missing when they are 3/4 of the way to the airport. They went in 2 separate groups and each group thought he was with the other group. When they do figure it out, everyone is freaking the frick out. Once they arrive at the airport, however, who do they find waiting for them but my friend? Not only did he figure out a way to get to the airport on his own, but he managed to beat them there by like 10 to 20 minutes. This all happened almost exactly 2 years ago. Another story from a different high school in my area. This school has an annual trip to Thailand for the same reason my school does, except they do it in year 9, freshman year, and only have Thailand as an option. While on the trip, a bunch of girls decided to sneak out at night and get tattoos. Needless to say, they were caught and were immediately sent home. I'd also like to note this happened many years ago, and that the high school involved is a fantastic high school, and these were just a small group of unusually stupid people. That high school is awesome, and if I were not at my school I'd be going there. Several years ago, my school decided to book a roller skating rink for a couple hours for an end of year trip. It was closed to the public. One student was both academically and behaviorally ineligible to go on the trip. Mom had other plans. She kept him home and simply drove him to the rink. After the field trip, kids went inside. She walked her kid over and attempted to buy a ticket. The ticket window wasn't even open, so she just brought him in. A teacher saw this and notified a staff member that the kid wasn't supposed to be there. The 20-something manager told mom to take her kid and leave. Mom lost her crap. She tried to slap the manager, then her kid's homeroom teacher. Lots of F-bombs and "I'll burn this shithole to the ground" ensued. Police were contacted and her son had the pleasant experience of watching his mom get cuffed and stuffed in front of the entire 7th grade. Can't imagine why the kid had behavior problems. Not a teacher but the student. I knew I wasn't popular. I got assigned to a hotel room with 3 other girls who were very vocal about their promiscuity. Fine, whatever. Then they told me none of them wanted to share a bed with me, so they were forcing me to sleep on the floor. Then they started throwing things on me while I was trying to sleep. Everything from toenail clippings to pieces of luggage. Then one by one they all called their boyfriends in the next room over and proceeded to have phone sex on speakerphone. When I asked them if they could be a little quieter, they told me to shut up and made me move to the room's entrance. Then they refused to let me use the bathroom in the morning. God, I hated high school. Parent here. My son went on a band trip and he said the bus driver was awful. Then later he texts that they got into a minor accident, but everyone's okay. My wife texts him back, "How close are you to the hotel?" He answered, "Touching it." I'm not a teacher, but there are lots of things that happened on the 8th grade trip to DC. My friends and I almost got lost because everyone was in front of us, and we got stopped because of a guy directing traffic. He let the cars go for maybe up to 3 minutes, despite seeing nervous 13 and 14-year-olds almost getting lost. Another time, there was a woman yelling at a cop right next to the bus. Another time, we were leaving an ice cream place to get on the bus. There was so much traffic and we were just waiting for 1 to 2 hours. It was so bad that people were recording it because it was usually never that bad. The tour guide literally had to get out of the car and yell at people in cars and direct traffic. Another time we couldn't go to Arlington Cemetery for a while because a bag was left there, and everyone had to evacuate because it was suspicious. Since that was delayed, we went to the 9/11 memorial. When we were just about to leave the memorial, the police told us to stay there because there was more suspicious activity or something. I was on the verge of having panic attacks many times, but thank God they never turned into actual panic attacks. Just went on a middle school field trip as a student teacher, where the kids went hiking in a nearby national park. As we were enjoying the hike, we passed by an elderly couple going in the opposite direction. One of our students told the husband that he should have been wearing a bra. I've never seen his teachers more mortified. Not a teacher, but when I was in 4th grade, our school in Japan had like big trips for the grade that they tried to make really fun, and the last few years got to go to a Coca-Cola factory and get free cans of Coke and stuff. So my class was hyped and we were so excited. Well, come to find out we were switching things up this year and instead we were going to a Mitsubishi car factory. The fumes in the engine room made so many kids pass out, almost including me. And yeah, kids were really unhappy and didn't really have a good time. Kid punched a dolphin. Petting tank at SeaWorld. Kid just hauled off and punched a dolphin. School was banned. Another time all the chaperones went to the beer tasting at Busch Gardens. That got a few people in trouble. Another time we had a kid from Kenya with us. She was straight up out of Africa for only a few weeks. When it was time to leave Disney, she got on the first bus she saw and ended up at Pleasure Island. Disney Springs now. Then there was the kid that destroyed 2 hotel rooms in Gainesville by flushing soap down the toilet. Another kid. Disney again roughed up a chipmunk. It was Chip or Dale. Disney security stopped our bus before we could leave and detained him. There is so much more. Not a teacher, but an autistic kid almost fell into a volcano once. I didn't go on the trip, but when I asked my teacher he told me the story. They were in Nicaragua and there was this kid. Let's call him Timmy. Timmy had severe autism and had trouble functioning in a social setting. He was always too giddy for his own good. The trip started off okay, but Timmy would only eat pancakes. He literally starved himself until they went out to buy pancake mix for him. Later on they went to a volcano and they were near the top. Everyone was on their hands and knees slowly climbing, nothing too steep, and Timmy is at the top just giggling and throwing rocks into the lava and volcano. The teachers had to slowly coax him down and he still didn't fully understand what was happening. Now the school trips happen later in the year so we can see if students are okay to go or not. Also a few years ago a girl somehow snuck animal blood on the plane and when everyone was sleeping at the lodge thing she pretended to slit her wrists and she got sent home. My school was weird. Either the time our bus tipped over, or the time an autistic student wandered away from the group in Millennium Park in Chicago. Both events were distinctly different yet similarly intense feelings of dread for me. Luckily in both cases, everybody was, relatively, unharmed. Nobody lost their life in the bus crash, but we did have a fair amount of broken bones and concussions. Took about 40 kids to Europe this year. We had a few couples. Most not super obvious, but we had to keep an eye on one particular pair. My worst fear was that they would try to have sex on the plane. Crisis averted on the way home because they broke up while on the Eiffel Tower. Not the day we went. Not while we walked to it. Not during the pictures. Nope. These kids were climbing down the tower and got into a fight that ended the relationship. Maybe not the worst thing, but I was relieved amused at the irony. We of course made sure they were both okay. They seemed to handle it well. As a teacher, I kept warning the children not to stand up on the bus because if the bus stopped suddenly they would fly forward and smash their faces against a hard metal bar. One girl didn't listen and learned the hard way that I was right. As a student, on a high school camping trip about 5-7 students were left behind at a national park while the rest of us went to eat pizza in a town several miles away. None of the staff realized they were missing until they showed up an hour later. Most horrifying, in one of the towns I lived in, children from another town were coming in for a sporting event. Their bus was coming down a steep hill when the lady in a car going the opposite direction stopped and waved for a child to go ahead and cross the street. Neither the lady nor the child noticed the bus, which didn't have enough time. It hit and killed the child with all of the children on board witnessing the death. Not a teacher, but I saw such a gross display of diarrhea in the bus we were riding. The dude literally wiped his butt with my classmate's backpack because the handkerchief he had was so full of crap already. Sorry, I'm not a teacher, but I am a student and know a few that's happened to me. 1. We went for a weekend into the mountains for Eco Week. One of the girls ran through the cabin naked. At the time everyone freaked, but I don't think anyone remembers it now. 2. 8th grade I was in a leadership class, and at the end we went on a hiking trip. We went in 3 separate groups, the fast hikers that would explore more space, medium, and slow. I went with the slow as I was very out of shape, and we began our climb. I believe we were supposed to all meet up at 2 so we could get back to school. Well, 1 comes and the teacher grabs the map, and I hear her say to the chaperone, "Wait, where are we?" And as I remember it, we wandered off the map we were given. Terrifying. We wandered around. 2 came. I think at 2:30 the teacher found something and managed to get us back. The teachers were worried, the kids were just playing. Not me, but on one Eton, very old English public school, trip to the Arctic, casual, one of the students was killed by a polar bear and several other people were mauled. The bear was then shot dead. When I was in 5th grade, my class took a field trip to Washington DC. It was my first ever overnight school trip and a huge deal because we weren't in a wealthy area. It was basically a long weekend whirlwind tour of museums and such. To save money, we stayed in churches to sleep. There was on a church that had a large activity room, so we all slept there on the second night. Boys on one side, girls on the other, chaperones in the middle. An entire wall was windows without any coverings. At about 1 o'clock in the morning, some girl starts screaming. We all wake up to see this guy standing in front of the window staring in at us. He ran off, but word spread that he was exposing himself and the chaperones moved us to interior rooms and called the cops. I'm not a teacher, but I went on this one. It was a geography excursion to a reservoir where we'd learn about how it all worked and the impacts of it on the surrounding mountains and pond life. Everyone was extremely disrespectful and uninterested in what the guides were talking about. But the worst part was that the popular group vandalized a memorial to the 100 or so people who died in a bushfire there. At the school I went to, they took a previous class to New York City from WA State, and one of the girls decided she was going to run off with a boy she met there. They had her under close watch all night, but the next day she tried to hop off the subway at a different stop from the group to go meet up with her newfound love. They managed to stop her, but that night had to fly her home for fear that she would escape. She was 16. I was a Daisy Scout chaperone with a bunch of 5th graders, including my daughter. Can't exactly remember the year, on an overnight field trip to a zoo, to see nocturnal animals, etc. We were around 40 girls, and chaperones, finally beginning to fall asleep in sleeping bags on the floor of one of the exhibit rooms when a huge rat scurries across the floor and over sleeping bags, when I proceed to scream, "OFU" at the top of my lungs. The girls wake up and start chanting, "Oh oh 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 oh. You said the F word." I thought I was going to die of embarrassment. My daughter and her friends are in college now and still bring it up occasionally. Remember when? I definitely won't win any Mom of the Year awards. I went to an island with my school where we then had to cycle to our hotel. However, the teachers weren't with enough teachers to keep an entire line of students close to each other because some could actually not cycle at all and fell behind. So as we were cycling to the hotel, the wind caused the line of students to just ruin out over a mile or so. At one point we make a turn to the right and you are right there at the hotel. But most students didn't know this. So 2 students, friends of mine, who couldn't see anyone turning right and no one told them to, just went right past the turning point. The horrible thing was that as I noticed my friends weren't there and I told my teachers they weren't there, I got very crappy answers like, "Have you looked in their room?" So like after 6 hours the teachers suddenly start asking me where my friends are, totally forgetting that I warned them hours ago. The teachers go full panic mode and just decide to randomly start cycling through the pouring rain. Eventually I just see my 2 friends arriving on their own. They actually got a lot of crap for it, even though it wasn't their fault at all. Not a teacher, it happened to me. In the 6th grade my class went on a trip to Chinatown. We got to ride the train downtown. First stop was a Chinese buffet. There was this fried squid that looked gross and some kids dared me to eat it. It was pretty gross. The next stop was a Chinese cultural center. My stomach was grumbly. Next thing I knew I was throwing up everywhere and I couldn't stop. I wasn't able to home, so the rest of the day I was covered in vomit. I'm not a teacher, but in my senior year of high school we went on a trip to Disney World. We spent an entire day at Blizzard Beach, which has a giant water slide that sends you plummeting straight down really fast. Well, an 18-year-old from my class pooped herself on the slide and the entire area had to be evacuated and cleaned up. Bus driver for high school soccer teams sometimes. A kid crap in a Doritos bag while most of the kids were pee at a rest stop. Couple minutes later some poor sap stuck his hand in that bag to eat some chips and was awarded the name Poopy Fingers for the rest of high school. Taught in London and took a whole year group to the Globe in London to see Hamlet. My group were lining up wonderfully near the Globe so we could do registers, but besides us, A group of French students on a school trip, about 15-16 years old, were messing about beneath the Millennium Bridge. One was climbing up a slanted support block and slipped, fell and smashed into the ground head first from about 6 feet up. All my students, all girls, gasped in horror at the same time and I ran over, along with another teacher, to help. The injured student was convulsing at this point and I had to grab his tongue and hold it so he wouldn't bite the thing off. The other students were ranting in French, which I don't speak at all, but thankfully the other teacher spoke a little, so told them to go find their teacher. At this point, the convulsing kid had stopped, so I put him in recovery position and was about to call 911 when a St. John's ambulance cyclist went past, apparently a thing on the riverside in case of incident. My wonderful students flagged him down and he took over. The student regained consciousness soon after, but I feel he must have at least had a nasty concussion. My mum's a teacher and told me on a school trip to some fancy hotel some girls jumped from one balcony to another, 12 floors up, for a Snapchat video. What? Not a teacher, and didn't go on the trip, but it was bad enough that I hate those involved. So my high school used to do really awesome senior trips that they'd fundraise for it all year. My brother's class did Los Angeles, my sister's class did Puerto Rico, though that second one has its own story. About my junior year, the French club in my school did a trip to France for the first time. Then while abroad, both the students and chaperones, both teachers and parents, got drunk and that caused scandals, forever ruining field trips for the school. So for my senior trip we got a day trip to NYC. No overnight, only a 2.5-hour bus ride. The best part about it was going to the bodies exhibit. While it was still a nice trip, it wasn't something that we really stood up to previous years. Obligatory. I'm not a teacher. This happened to a class at my sister's school and I have had multiple people tell me the story. Pretty sure it's true. High school art class on a trip to another city. They stopped at a rural rest stop with a cafe for refreshments and a toilet stop and got back on the bus and drove off. A dozen kilometers up the road, the bus driver saw a biker on a chopper trying to flag him down. Visible facial tattoos, sleeveless leather jacket, with gang patch, and dreadlocks whipping in the breeze. The bus driver didn't want to stop, but the biker pulls in front of him and slows to a stop, so the driver had no choice but to do the same. Driver and teacher watch as the biker helped down the female student left at the cafe from the back of the bike, retrieves his helmet from her and sped off. I know who the teacher was and she obviously managed to keep her job somehow. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.